The thunder rolled across the Montana prairie as Noah Daniels stared at the two tiny faces gazing up at him, their mother's eyes looking back in silent accusation. He wasn't ready for this, couldn't possibly be ready yet. Here he stood in 1878, a 30-year-old widower with 2-month-old twins who depended on him for everything, while he could barely depend on himself. The wooden cabin creaked under the force of the gathering storm. It was a sturdy enough structure, built with his own hands 3 years ago when he and Catherine had first settled on this patch of land. They'd had dreams, then dreams of a cattle ranch that would grow alongside their family. But Catherine had died bringing their daughters into the world, and now Noah was left with a half-built dream and 2 helpless infants who needed more than he knew how to give. Emma and Lily Catherine had chosen their names months before, whispering them to her swollen belly as she rocked in the chair Noah had carved. That chair now sat empty by the hearth, a ghost of what should have been. "What am I supposed to do with you two?" he asked softly, adjusting the blanket around Emma's tiny form. She squirmed in response, her face scrunching up in what Noah had learned was the prelude to a hungry cry. Her sister would follow within minutes. They always seemed to hunger in tandem. Noah sighed, running a calloused hand through his dark hair. He'd been a cowboy most of his life, driving cattle across the plains, sleeping under stars, and living by his wits. Nothing in that life had prepared him for warming milk, changing cloths, or soothing midnight screams that seemed to have no end. Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring farm had helped in the first weeks after Catherine's passing. She'd shown Noah how to mix goat's milk with water and a touch of sugar, how to check if it was too hot, how to burp the girls after feeding. But Mrs. Peterson had her own family to tend to, and her visits had become less frequent. Now Noah was truly alone with his daughters. As predicted, Emma's face reddened, her mouth opening in a wail that pierced the quiet cabin. Lily joined in seconds later, a duet of desperate need that Noah scrambled to address. All right," he murmured, reaching for the bottle he'd prepared earlier. He cradled Emma in one arm, guiding the rubber nipple to her seeking mouth while trying to quiet Lily with gentle bounces. Outside, the rain began to fall. Inside, Noah wondered how long he could continue this impossible balancing act before something or someone broke. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having washed the world clean. Noah had managed perhaps 3 hours of broken sleep, interrupted by feedings and changes and the inexplicable crying that sometimes overtook his daughters. He moved through his morning routine like a man underwater, slow, dreamlike, detached from himself. The twins lay in the cradle he'd fashioned, temporarily content after their morning feeding. Noah stepped out onto the porch, surveying his land. The cattle needed tending. The vegetable patch Catherine had started needed weeding. The roof on the barn had sprung a leak during last night's storm, and he needed help. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Noah had rejected the suggestion from the town doctor that he find the girls a new mother or, failing that, send them to the orphanage in Helena. They were his flesh and blood, Catherine's legacy. He would not abandon them, but he couldn't do this alone. Noah spent the morning splitting his attention between his daughters and his essential chores. He moved the cradle out to the porch where he could keep an eye on them while he repaired the fence near the house. When they fussed, he stopped his work immediately, a fact that meant simple tasks stretched to fill hours. By midday, he was exhausted and the girls were cranky. The milk he'd prepared wasn't settling well with Lily, who kept bringing it back up faster than Noah could clean her. Emma seemed determined not to sleep, her eyes wide and watchful even as Noah rocked and sang the lullabies Catherine had practiced during her pregnancy. "Your mama would know what to do," he told them, voice rough with emotion. "She would have been the best mother in the territory." Emma blinked at him, her tiny hand grasping at air. Noah offered his finger, marveling at the strength of her grip despite her size. These girls were fighters just like their mother. They deserved better than a father who was barely keeping them alive. A decision crystallized in his mind. Tomorrow he would ride into town and post an advertisement for a housekeeper. Someone who knew about babies. Someone who could help him give these girls the care they needed until they were old enough for him to manage on his own. It wasn't giving up, it was doing what was best for his daughters. With that plan providing some measure of relief, Noah settled into the afternoon routine of feeding, changing, and attempting to coax smiles from his somber-faced girls. The next morning brought new challenges. Noah had planned to ride into town, but Lily had developed a slight fever during the night. Panic gripped him as he felt her too warm skin. He'd sent for the doctor the night Catherine died, but the man had arrived too late. Noah couldn't bear the thought of failing another member of his family. He spent the day bathing Lily with cool water, desperately trying to bring down her temperature while keeping Emma fed and content. By evening, Lily's fever had broken, but Noah was shattered. The trip to town would have to wait. Days passed in this fashion. Each morning Noah would wake determined to ride to town, and each day some new crisis would emerge. A coyote threatened the chickens. A fence broke, allowing 2 cows to wander. Emma developed a rash that Noah treated with a salve Mrs. Peterson had left. And through it all, the twins grew. Small changes appeared daily: stronger neck muscles, more focused eyes, the beginnings of what might someday be smiles. Noah found himself talking to them constantly, narrating his days, telling them about their mother, about the ranch, about the world they would someday explore. "Your mama loved this land," he told them one evening as he sat in Catherine's rocking chair, a twin in each arm. Said she knew it was home the first time she saw the mountains in the distance. Said this valley had everything a person could want: good water, rich soil, and room to dream. The girls watched him with their matching blue eyes, Catherine's eyes. In those moments, Noah felt a flicker of hope that perhaps he could do this after all. Perhaps the 3 of them could build something beautiful from the ashes of their loss. But reality always intruded. Noah was losing weight, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. The house, never particularly tidy even when Catherine was alive, had descended into chaos. Dishes piled up. Laundry remained unwashed. Dust gathered in corners Catherine would never have tolerated. And Noah was lonely. The isolation that had once appealed to him, their nearest neighbor a mile away, the town of Riverspend a half-day's ride, now felt like a punishment. He spoke only to his daughters, who couldn't respond, and occasionally to his livestock, who were equally unimpressed by his conversation. It was late June, nearly 3 months since the twins' birth and Catherine's death, when Noah finally managed to make it into town. Mrs. Peterson had agreed to watch the girls for a few hours. "You look like death warmed over, Mr. Daniels," she'd said bluntly, giving Noah the chance to seek help. Riverspend was a growing settlement, boasting a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other businesses catering to the ranchers, farmers, and prospectors in the surrounding area. Noah hadn't visited since before Catherine's confinement began. He felt strange riding down the main street without her list of supplies in his pocket, without the anticipation of bringing her back some small treat or ribbon, a piece of candy, a penny novel. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. The familiar scent of coffee, tobacco, and various dry goods greeted him. "Noah Daniels, as I live and breathe." The store's owner, Herbert Wilson, came around the counter to clasp Noah's hand. "We'd begun to wonder if you'd picked up and moved on. How are those little ones of yours?" "Growing," Noah answered, his voice rough from disuse. "Keeping me busy." Herbert's face softened with sympathy. "I can imagine. My Mabel had our 4 spaced out over 10 years, and each one nearly drove us to distraction. Can't imagine having 2 at once. And without." He trailed off, clearly not wanting to mention Catherine. Noah cleared his throat. Actually, that's why I'm here. I need to post an advertisement for a housekeeper. Someone who knows about babies. Herbert nodded thoughtfully. Not a bad idea. Let me get you some paper. Noah composed his notice carefully, stating his need for a housekeeper familiar with infant care, offering room and board plus a modest salary. He made no mention of his own loneliness or desperation, though he suspected both were evident in the simple fact of the advertisement. Herbert promised to display it prominently and to mention it to anyone who might be interested. Things have a way of working out, Noah, he said as Noah prepared to leave. The good Lord doesn't give us more than we can handle. Noah wasn't so sure about that, but he nodded anyway. After purchasing supplies and checking at the post office for any mail, there was none. He mounted his horse for the ride home, a mix of hope and dread churning in his stomach. What kind of woman would answer such an advertisement? Would she be kind to his daughters? Would she judge him for the state of his home, his life? The next 2 weeks passed without any response to his advertisement. Noah began to consider more drastic measures. Perhaps he would need to travel to Helena after all, to seek out a young widow or spinster in need of employment. The thought of leaving the twins even for a few days filled him with anxiety. It was a sweltering July afternoon when fate intervened. Noah had just settled the twins for their nap and was attempting to tackle the mountain of dirty dishes when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Wiping his hands on a towel, he stepped out onto the porch, squinting against the bright sunlight. A small wagon drawn by a single horse came into view. Noah couldn't make out the driver until the wagon drew closer, revealing a woman wearing a practical bonnet that shaded her face. She pulled the wagon to a stop in front of his house and set the brake. "Mr. Daniels?" she called, her voice clear and steady. "Noah Daniels? That's me," Noah replied, suddenly conscious of his rumpled appearance and the stubble on his jaw. He hadn't shaved in days. The woman climbed down from the wagon with practiced ease, revealing herself to be of medium height and build. When she removed her bonnet, Noah saw a woman perhaps in her mid-20s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical braid and warm brown eyes that assessed him frankly. "I'm Julia Hayes," she said, approaching the porch with a basket covered with a cloth. "I saw your advertisement in Mr. Wilson's store. I've come about the position." Noah stared at her, momentarily speechless. Julia Hayes didn't match any of the images he'd conjured when thinking about who might respond to his advertisement. He'd imagined an older woman, grandmotherly and stern, or perhaps a desperately poor young girl seeking any employment. Julia Hayes looked neither desperate nor grandmotherly. She looked capable. "Mr. Daniels?" she prompted, a slight smile touching her lips. "Are you still in need of help?" Noah cleared his throat. Yes, of course. Please, come inside." He held the door open for her, suddenly hyper-aware of the state of his home. Julia stepped inside, her eyes taking in the cluttered main room with its unwashed dishes, scattered baby items, and general disarray. If she was shocked, she hid it well. "I brought bread," she said, placing the basket on the table and removing the cloth to reveal a golden loaf that sent a tantalizing aroma through the cabin. "Fresh baked this morning." "That's very kind," Noah managed, trying to remember the last time he'd eaten something that hadn't come from a can or been hastily fried. "Please sit down. Can I offer you coffee?" Julia glanced at the stove, which had clearly not been lit that day. "Why don't I make us both some coffee, and you can tell me about your children?" Without waiting for a response, she removed her light jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and set about lighting the stove and preparing coffee with the supplies Noah indicated. There was something soothing about watching her efficient movements, the way she navigated his kitchen as if she'd done so 100 times before. "The twins are napping," Noah said, feeling the need to explain the silence. They're usually good for about an hour if we're lucky. Julia nodded, measuring coffee grounds into the pot. How old are they? 3 months, give or take a few days. They were born on April 12th. Girls or boys? Julia asked, setting the coffee to boil. Girls. Emma and Lily. Julia smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pleasant to something Noah could only describe as radiant. Lovely names. And their mother. Noah's chest tightened. Catherine died bringing them into the world. Julia's smile faded, replaced by genuine sympathy. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Daniels. The simple sincerity in her voice threatened to unravel Noah's carefully maintained composure. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Julia seemed to sense his discomfort, turning the conversation to practical matters as she prepared their coffee. Your advertisement mentioned you need someone familiar with infant care. I helped raise my 4 younger siblings after our mother died, including a set of twins. I've also worked as a midwife's assistant and as a housekeeper for several families with young children. She placed a cup of coffee before Noah and seated herself across from him with her own cup. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Daniels. I can cook, clean, sew, and tend to your daughters. I'm also familiar with vegetable gardening and basic animal care, should that be needed. Noah sipped his coffee the best he'd tasted in months and studied the woman across from him. Julia Hayes was a godsend, if everything she said was true, but something nagged at him. If you don't mind my asking, Miss Hayes, why would a woman with your skills be answering an advertisement for a position so far from town? Surely there are families in Riversbend who would value your services. Julia met his gaze steadily. I recently left a position in Helena that had become uncomfortable. I'm looking for a fresh start in a new place. Your advertisement seemed providential. There was more to that story, Noah was certain, but he wasn't in a position to be picky. If Julia Hayes could help him keep his daughters healthy and happy, he was willing to overlook a mysterious past. Before he could respond, a thin cry emanated from the bedroom. Within seconds, it was joined by a second, slightly lower-pitched wail. Julia raised an eyebrow. That didn't sound like an hour. Noah sighed, rising from his chair. It rarely is. May I? Julia asked, standing as well. Noah hesitated only briefly before nodding. He led her to the small bedroom where the twins shared a cradle. Both girls were awake and crying, their faces reddening with the effort. Julia approached the cradle with Noah, looking down at the infants with a gentle smile. Hello, little ones, she said softly. Aren't you beautiful? To Noah's surprise, both girls momentarily quieted at the sound of a new voice, their eyes widening as they regarded the stranger. Which is which? Julia asked. Emma has the birthmark on her left hand, Noah explained. Lily is slightly smaller. Julia nodded, then reached down to lift Lily with practiced ease. Would you like me to help with their feeding? You can show me how you've been managing. For the next hour, Noah demonstrated his feeding methods while Julia offered gentle suggestions. She showed him a better way to hold the bottles, a more effective burping technique, and a swaddling method that seemed to comfort the babies immediately. You've been doing remarkably well on your own, Mr. Daniels, she said as they settled the now content twins back in their cradle. Most men wouldn't have managed half so well. The unexpected praise warmed Noah in a way he hadn't experienced in months. It doesn't feel like I'm doing well, he admitted. Most days I'm just trying to keep them alive and myself sane. Julia's eyes crinkled with understanding. That's all any new parent is doing, Mr. Daniels, whether they admit it or not. The fact that your daughters are thriving shows you're doing something right. They returned to the main room, where Julia cut 2 slices of her bread and offered one to Noah. The simple act of eating something fresh and delicious, prepared by someone else, nearly brought tears to his eyes. Miss Hayes, he said after finishing his bread. If you're serious about the position, it's yours. The pay isn't much, and the accommodations are humble, but you'd be saving 3 lives by accepting. Julia studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I have a few conditions, she said finally. I would need 1 day off each week to attend church and handle any personal business in town. I would require my own sleeping space, even if it's just a curtained-off corner. And I would ask that you treat me with respect and acknowledge that when it comes to household matters and childcare, my experience may sometimes outweigh your authority as the children's father. Noah considered her terms, finding them entirely reasonable. Agreed on all counts. There's a small room off the kitchen. It was meant to be a pantry, but we never fully converted it. It has a window and enough space for a bed and small trunk. Would that suit? Julia nodded. When would you like me to start? How soon can you gather your belongings? A shadow crossed Julia's face. Everything I own is in that wagon, Mr. Daniels. I can start immediately. Something about her tone told Noah not to press for details. Then welcome to your new home, Miss Hayes. The first evening with Julia in the house brought a peace Noah hadn't experienced since before Catherine's death. Julia insisted on preparing dinner while Noah tended to the outdoor chores he'd been neglecting. When he returned to the cabin, he found a transformed space, the dishes washed, the floor swept, the table set with a simple but appetizing meal of beans, bacon, and her homemade bread. Most remarkably, the twins were content in a makeshift pen Julia had created using a quilt on the floor, surrounded by cushions to prevent rolling. They lay side by side, occasionally batting at each other or at the colorful scraps of fabric Julia had tied to a piece of string stretched above them. They need to spend time on their stomachs, Julia explained when she noticed Noah's questioning look. It helps strengthen their necks and backs. And they need things to look at and reach for. Babies learn through their senses. Noah watched his daughters, noticing how they seemed more alert and engaged than he could remember seeing them. You've done all this in just a few hours? Julia shrugged, placing a steaming plate before him. I simply applied what I know works. Eat while it's hot, Mr. Daniels. We can talk after dinner. The meal was simple but perfectly prepared, and Noah found himself eating with an appetite he'd thought long gone. Between bites, he watched Julia move around the cabin, checking on the twins, adding wood to the stove, organizing various items that had been scattered about. You must be exhausted, he said when she finally sat down with her own plate. I've had busier days, she replied with a small smile, and there's satisfaction in bringing order to chaos. After dinner, they established a routine for the twins' evening care. Julia showed Noah how she preferred to bathe the infants, using less water but cleaning them more thoroughly than his previous method. She demonstrated a gentle massage with olive oil that seemed to relax the girls, making them more likely to sleep for longer stretches. My mother always said that babies who are touched lovingly grow up to be loving people, Julia explained as she worked her fingers gently over Emma's tiny limbs. I don't know if it's true, but it certainly helps them sleep. By the time they settled the twins for the night, Noah felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in months, he wasn't solely responsible for every aspect of his daughter's care. For the first time, he could imagine a future where they didn't just survive, but thrived. Thank you, he said simply as Julia prepared to retire to her small room. I was drowning, and you've thrown me a lifeline. Julia paused, regarding him with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see more than Noah was comfortable revealing. We all need help sometimes, Mr. Daniels. There's no shame in accepting it when it's offered. She disappeared into her room then, leaving Noah alone with his thoughts and the soft breathing of his sleeping daughters. The days began to take on a rhythm with Julia in the house. She rose early, preparing breakfast before the twins awakened. Noah handled the morning chores with the livestock, returning to find his daughters fed and the house already taking on a more organized appearance. During the days, Julia managed the household tasks and primary care of the twins, allowing Noah to attend to the ranch work that had been neglected for months. In the evenings, they shared the responsibility of bathing and settling the girls, with Noah taking an increasingly active role as Julia taught him more effective techniques. "You have a natural gentleness with them," Julia observed one evening as Noah rocked Lily to sleep. "They respond to that." Noah glanced down at his daughter's peaceful face. "I'm afraid of breaking them. They seem so fragile." "Babies are more resilient than they appear," Julia assured him. "And these two have their father's strength. I can see it already." Such moments of quiet conversation became frequent as they navigated their new arrangement. Noah learned that Julia was 26, the oldest of 6 children from a farming family outside Helena. Her mother had died when Julia was 16, leaving her to help her father raise her younger siblings. The twins were the youngest, she told Noah as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset while the girls slept inside. "Bobby and Betty. They're 14 now, nearly grown. Do you miss them?" Noah asked. Julia nodded, her eyes distant. "Every day. But they have my father and our older brother's family nearby. They don't need me the way they once did." She didn't volunteer more about why she had left Helena, and Noah didn't ask. Whatever had driven her away had brought her to his door, and for that, he could only be grateful. July faded into August, bringing even hotter days that wilted the garden Julia had revitalized. Noah expanded the shaded area on the porch so the twins could spend time outdoors without risking sunburn on their fair skin. He found himself watching Julia as she sang to the girls, told them stories, or simply talked to them as she went about her work. "Babies need conversation to learn language," she explained when she caught him listening to her detailed description of bread, making to a wide-eyed Lily. "It doesn't matter what you say, only that you talk to them often." Noah began to follow her example, narrating his work when the girls were nearby, describing the cattle, the mountains, the changing sky. To his surprise, he found it natural and even comforting to share his thoughts with his daughters, even if they couldn't yet understand. As August progressed, Noah noticed subtle changes in his relationship with Julia. The formality of their early interactions gradually gave way to a more comfortable companionship. Mr. Daniels became Noah one evening when Julia called him in from the barn to witness Emma's first deliberate smile. He began calling her Julia the night they stayed up until dawn with a colicky Lily, passing the distressed infant between them until she finally exhausted herself into sleep. They developed private jokes, shared references, and an unspoken understanding of each other's moods. Noah found himself looking forward to their conversations over dinner, to the quiet evenings on the porch after the twins were asleep. Julia's presence had transformed his home from a place of grief and struggle to one of growing peace and even occasional joy. It was during one such evening in late August when Noah realized something that both terrified and exhilarated him. Julia was describing her plans for preserving the tomatoes that had finally ripened in her garden, her face animated in the golden light of sunset, when Noah was struck by how beautiful she was. Not in the delicate, refined way that Catherine had been beautiful, but in a vital, earthy manner that spoke of strength and resilience. More than that, he realized how essential she had become not just to his daughter's well-being, but to his own. The thought of her leaving someday, moving on to another position or perhaps her own family, created a hollow feeling in his chest that he recognized all too well. He was falling in love with Julia Hayes. The realization should have filled him with guilt. Catherine had been gone barely 5 months, yet Noah couldn't summon shame for these emerging feelings. Catherine herself had once told him, during a frank discussion about the dangers of childbirth on the frontier, that should anything happen to her, she would want him to find happiness again. "Life is too short and too hard to spend it alone," she had said, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Promise me you won't become one of those tragic widowers who never allows himself joy again." He had promised, though he'd never truly believed he would need to honor that promise. Now, watching Julia describe the difference between dill and sweet pickles with passionate detail, he wondered if Catherine had somehow known that he would need that absolution. Noah kept his realization to himself, uncertain whether Julia could ever see him as more than an employer or perhaps a friend. She was unfailingly kind to him, but she was kind to everyone. She showed genuine affection for his daughters, but that didn't necessarily extend to romantic interest in their father. And there was still the mystery of why she had left Helena. What uncomfortable situation had driven her to seek employment so far from her family? Until he understood that, Noah couldn't in good conscience act on his growing feelings. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the twins' increased mobility. At nearly 5 months old, they were learning to roll over intentionally, reaching for objects with growing coordination, and developing distinct personalities. Emma was bold and determined, often frustrating herself by attempting more than her body could accomplish. Lily was more cautious but equally curious, studying everything intently before making her move. Julia had expanded their play area to encompass most of the main room, creating a safe space where they could explore under supervision. She made toys from household items, wooden spoons with ribbons tied to the handles, tin cups that made satisfying sounds when batted across the floor, softballs created from scraps of fabric. "Children don't need store-bought toys," she told Noah when he offered to purchase some on his next trip to town. "They need things that engage their senses and imagination. Though," she added with a smile, "a rubber teething ring wouldn't go amiss. They'll be cutting teeth before we know it." The casual use of the word warmed Noah in a way he didn't dare examine too closely. The first significant test of their new family arrangement came when both twins fell ill with colds in mid-September. For 3 days and nights, the girls were miserable, congested, feverish, and inconsolable. Noah and Julia took turns walking the floor with them, applying cool compresses to their foreheads, and using a steam tent Julia created to ease their breathing. On the second night, with both girls finally sleeping fitfully, Noah found Julia at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "You should get some sleep," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "I'll listen for them." Julia looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and worry. "I can't help thinking about my brother," she said, her voice barely audible. "He was 7 months old when he caught a cold. It turned to pneumonia so quickly, by the time the doctor arrived." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I know I'm being foolish. Children get colds. Most recover without incident." Noah sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "It's not foolish to worry about children you love," he said gently. "But Emma and Lily are strong. They're already improving. And they have something my mother always said was the best medicine." "What's that?" Julia asked, her fingers tightening around his. "Someone who loves them enough to worry," Noah replied, the words coming from a place of certainty he hadn't known he possessed. "They have 2 someones, in fact." Julia's eyes met his, a question in their depths that Noah wasn't yet ready to answer. Instead, he squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "Go to bed, Julia. I promise to wake you if either of them needs you." She nodded, rising from the table with visible effort. At the door to her room, she paused. "Thank you, Noah, for understanding." "Always," he replied, the word hanging in the air between them like a promise. The twins recovered fully within a week, their resilience remarkable to Noah, who had feared the worst during those long nights of illness. If anything, they seemed more active and vocal after their recovery, as if making up for lost time. Life settled back into its pleasant routine, with one significant change. The unspoken barrier between employer and employee had been irreversibly altered during those nights of shared worry. Noah and Julia moved around each other with a new awareness, a deeper connection that neither acknowledged directly, but both felt keenly. October brought the first frost, turning the prairie grasses golden and the distant mountains white-capped against the impossibly blue sky. The twins celebrated their half-year birthday by attempting to crawl, though neither quite mastered the coordination required. Julia baked a small cake with a single candle to mark the occasion, though Noah suspected it was more for their benefit than the girls, who were more interested in smashing the cake than eating it. 6 months, Noah marveled as they cleaned frosting from the twins' hair that evening. I can hardly believe it. They'll be walking before you know it, Julia said, efficiently wiping Lily's face despite the child's attempts to evade the cloth. Talking soon after that. Time passes more quickly with children than without them, I found. Is that why you came here? Noah asked, seizing the natural opening. Because time was passing too slowly in Helena? Julia's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. For a long moment, Noah thought she wouldn't answer. I came here because I needed to leave, she said finally, her voice measured. I had been working as a housekeeper for a prominent family in Helena. The husband was a banker, his wife a social leader. They had 2 young children whom I cared for alongside my household duties. She focused intently on Lily, avoiding Noah's gaze. It was a good position until it wasn't. Noah waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. The banker became inappropriate in his attentions, Julia continued, her voice dropping. At first, it was small things, compliments, standing too close, finding reasons to be where I was working. Then it escalated to touches, suggestions, and finally, demands. Her cheeks flushed with remembered humiliation. When I refused him, he claimed I had been stealing from the household. His wife believed him, of course. I was dismissed without a reference. Noah's hands clenched involuntarily. Did you have anywhere to go? Julia shook her head. My father remarried last year. His new wife is a good woman, but there's no room in their home for me, not with my younger siblings still there. I stayed with a friend temporarily, but I knew I needed to leave Helena. Your advertisement seemed like divine intervention. This banker, Noah said carefully, did he hurt you? Not physically, Julia replied, finally meeting his eyes. But he destroyed my reputation in Helena. No respectable family would hire me after what he claimed. The injustice of it burned in Noah's chest. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm grateful you found your way here, though I wish it had been under better circumstances. I've made peace with it, Julia said, lifting Emma from the wash basin. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as misfortunes. Her eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary, and Noah felt a surge of hope that perhaps she, too, felt the connection growing between them. The days grew shorter as October progressed, bringing colder nights and the promise of winter. Noah increased his trips to town, stockpiling supplies they would need if snow made travel difficult. On one such trip, he encountered Herbert Wilson, who greeted him warmly. Noah, the transformation in you is remarkable, the storekeeper said, clapping him on the shoulder. I hardly recognized the well-rested, well-fed man before me. Noah laughed, somewhat self-consciously. I have Miss Hayes to thank for that. She's been a godsend with the twins. Ah, yes, your housekeeper, Herbert said, his tone suggesting he suspected there might be more to the arrangement. How are those little girls of yours? Growing faster than I can believe, Noah replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. They're trying to crawl now, and making all sorts of noises that Julia insists are almost words. Julia, is it? Herbert's eyes twinkled. Well, it sounds like you found exactly what you needed. I did, Noah agreed, leaving unspoken the realization that what he needed had turned out to be more than just household help. On the ride home, Noah pondered Herbert's knowing look and his own increasingly undeniable feelings for Julia. She had been with them for over 3 months now, becoming so integral to their daily life that Noah could no longer imagine the household without her. The twins adored her, lighting up whenever she entered a room. More than that, she had brought warmth back into a home that had grown cold with grief. Noah was not the same broken man who had posted that desperate advertisement in July. Julia's steady presence had allowed him to heal, to rediscover joy in his children, his land, and his life. He needed her to know what she meant to him, but the timing troubled him. Julia had come to them seeking safety and stability after a traumatic experience. Would she interpret his feelings as another unwanted advance from an employer? Would she feel pressured to reciprocate out of fear for her position? The thought made Noah physically ill. No, he decided as the ranch came into view. He would wait, give her more time to feel secure, to know beyond any doubt that her place with them was not contingent on anything but her desire to stay. The decision made, Noah felt a strange combination of relief and impatience. He would wait, but not forever. Someday, when the time was right, he would tell Julia Hayes exactly what she meant to him and his daughters. That opportunity came sooner than Noah had anticipated, though not in the way he had imagined. A week before Thanksgiving, a letter arrived for Julia. Noah brought it from town, curious about the Helena postmark but respectful of her privacy. Julia's face paled when she saw it, and she excused herself to read it alone while Noah played with the twins. When she returned, her expression was troubled. "It's from my friend in Helena," she explained without prompting. "The banker's wife has discovered his proclivities. It seems I wasn't the only household employee he approached. She has publicly apologized for believing his accusations and offered to clear my name." "That's good news, isn't it?" Noah asked, though a knot formed in his stomach at the thought of what might follow. "She's also offered me my position back, with increased wages and her personal guarantee of protection." Julia twisted the letter in her hands. "My friend says several other families have also expressed interest in hiring me, now that the truth is known." The knot in Noah's stomach tightened. "I see. I would need to respond soon," Julia continued, not quite meeting his eyes. "The winter weather will make travel difficult before long." "Of course," Noah managed, his voice surprisingly steady despite the panic rising within him. "You should take the time you need to consider your options." Julia nodded, carefully refolding the letter. "Thank you. I should start dinner." She retreated to the kitchen, leaving Noah with the twins and a growing sense of desperation. He had waited too long. Now Julia had the opportunity to return to Helena, to resume the life that had been unfairly taken from her. He couldn't ask her to give that up, to remain in this isolated cabin with a widower and his children when she could have her reputation and career restored. Yet the thought of losing her was unbearable. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Noah found Julia sitting on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket and staring at the star-filled sky. "You'll catch your death out here," he said softly, sitting beside her. "I needed to think," she replied. "It's clearer somehow under the stars." They sat in silence for several minutes, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "Will you go back to Helena?" Noah finally asked, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer. Julia sighed. "I should. It's the sensible choice. Better wages, more opportunities, closer to my family." Each word felt like a physical blow. Noah nodded, staring out at the darkened landscape. "We'll miss you," he said simply, the understatement of the century. "Will you?" Julia's voice was so quiet Noah almost missed the question. He turned to look at her, finding her eyes already on him, searching his face for something he hadn't been brave enough to show. In that moment, Noah knew he couldn't let her leave without telling her the truth. "I will miss you every day," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The twins will miss your voice, your smile, the way you know exactly what they need before they know it themselves. But I—" He paused, gathering his courage. "I will miss all that and more. I'll miss our conversations, the way you hum when you work, how you always seem to know when I need silence or company. I'll miss watching you with my daughters, seeing the love in your eyes when you hold them." Julia's eyes widened, but she remained silent, waiting. "I know it's selfish," Noah continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd begun. "You deserve the chance to rebuild your life in Helena, to be near your family, to have all the opportunities a town can offer that our little ranch cannot. But I had to tell you before you decide that you have become essential to me. I find myself thinking of the future and unable to imagine it without you in it." "Noah," Julia whispered, her eyes shining in the starlight. "I don't expect anything," he hurried to add. "I know you came here for employment. Not this. Whatever you decide, your position here is secure for as long as you want it. I just couldn't let you go without telling you that somewhere between that first loaf of bread and tonight, I fell in love with you, Julia Hayes." The confession hung in the air between them, irretrievable. Noah waited, heart pounding, for her response. Julia's hand emerged from the blanket, reaching for his. "I've been sitting here trying to find a reason to stay that doesn't sound foolish," she said, her fingers twining with his. "A reason that makes more sense than turning down better wages and opportunities just to remain in a drafty cabin miles from town." Noah's heart sank, but he maintained his grip on her hand. "The only reason I could find," Julia continued, "is that the thought of leaving you and the girls makes me feel physically ill. That over these past months, this drafty cabin has become more home to me than anywhere I've lived since my mother died. That I find myself thinking of Emma and Lily as if they were my own." Her voice softened further. "That I think of you far more often, and in ways far less professional, than a housekeeper should think of her employer." Hope bloomed in Noah's chest. "Julia, are you saying—" "I'm saying that I love them," she interrupted, squeezing his hand. "And I love you, Noah Daniels. I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, that you're still grieving Catherine, that you could never see me as anything more than the help. But if there's even a chance that you mean what you just said—" "I meant every word," Noah assured her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I will always honor Catherine's memory and what she gave me in our daughters. But my heart has room for new love, a love I never expected to find, especially not when a woman with fresh bread appeared on my doorstep when I was at my lowest." Julia laughed softly, leaning into his touch. "I saw you that day, exhausted and overwhelmed but still so gentle with your daughters, and something in me recognized something in you. I told myself it was just sympathy or admiration for a father doing his best. But it was more than that, even then." Noah leaned forward, pausing when his face was inches from hers. "Julia Hayes, would you consider staying, not as our housekeeper, but as my wife? As a mother to Emma and Lily? It won't always be easy, and I can't offer you the comforts of town life, but I promise to love you every day for the rest of our lives." Tears spilled onto Julia's cheeks. "You once told me you were drowning, and I had thrown you a lifeline," she whispered. "What you didn't know is that I was drowning too, in a different way. You and the girls gave me purpose again, a place to belong. Yes, Noah. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife." Noah closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. Julia's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as the blanket fell forgotten to the porch floor. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Noah pressed his forehead to hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Christmas," Julia replied without hesitation. It gives us time to make preparations, and it would be a beautiful beginning. Christmas it is, Noah agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparations and growing anticipation. Noah rode into town to speak with the minister, arranging for the ceremony to be held at the ranch on Christmas Eve. Julia wrote to her family in Helena, inviting them to the wedding and explaining her decision not to return. To her delight, her father and several of her siblings responded that they would make the journey. The twins seemed to sense the excitement in the household, becoming more vocal and active than ever. They mastered crawling just before Thanksgiving, leading to a frantic reorganization of the cabin to ensure their safety. Their first teeth emerged the same week, bringing challenging nights that Noah and Julia now faced together, no longer as employer and employee, but as partners in all things. "Do you think they'll understand what's happening?" Noah asked one evening as they watched the girls playing on their quilt. "That you'll be their mother now, not just Julia?" Julia smiled, her eyes soft as she gazed at the twins. "They understand love, Noah. Everything else will come with time." 2 days before Christmas, Julia's family arrived: her father, her younger brothers, and the twins Bobby and Betty, now gangly teenagers but clearly adoring of their oldest sister. They brought wedding gifts, stories from Helena, and a warmth that filled the small cabin to bursting. Noah watched as Julia introduced Emma and Lily to their new family, her face alight with joy. He thought of Catherine then, as he often did in moments of significance, and felt a profound gratitude for the love she had given him, and for the love he had unexpectedly found again. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the landscape transformed by a fresh dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. Inside the cabin, now decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, Noah dressed in his best shirt and trousers, his hands slightly unsteady as he fastened the buttons. A knock at the bedroom door revealed Julia's father, John Hayes, a solid man with the same warm eyes as his daughter. "May I come in?" he asked, entering at Noah's nod. "I wanted a moment with my future son-in-law before the ceremony." "Of course, sir," Noah replied, suddenly nervous under the older man's scrutiny. John Hayes studied him for a long moment before speaking. "When Julia first wrote to us about this position, I worried. A single man with infant twins. Miles from town, it seemed a recipe for trouble, especially after what she'd endured in Helena." Noah nodded, understanding the concern. "I hope I've proven those worries unfounded." "More than that," John agreed. "In all my years, I've rarely seen my daughter as happy as she's been these past few days. She speaks of you and those little girls with such love." He extended his hand. "I believe you're a good man, Noah Daniels. I'm proud to welcome you to our family." Noah clasped the offered hand, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you, sir. I promise to cherish her always." The ceremony itself was simple but profound. The minister from Riversbend officiated in the main room of the cabin, which had been transformed by Julia and her siblings into a space of surprising beauty. Neighbors from surrounding farms attended, along with Herbert Wilson and several other townspeople who had made the journey despite the winter weather. Emma and Lily, dressed in matching white gowns Julia had sewn, were held by their new aunts and uncles, occasionally adding their own vocalizations to the proceedings, much to the amusement of the gathered guests. When Julia appeared in a simple blue dress, her hair adorned with winter berries and evergreen, Noah felt his heart might burst from the fullness of his joy. She walked to him with steady steps, her eyes never leaving his, and took his hands before the minister. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deeply personal meaning. When Noah placed the simple gold band on Julia's finger, a band that had been his mother's, sent from his brother in Kansas when Noah had written of his impending marriage, he added words not in the standard ceremony. "With this ring, I give you my heart, my future, and my solemn promise that you will never face life's storms alone again." Julia's eyes shimmered with tears as she responded, "I accept all that you offer, and promise the same in return. Where you go, I will go. Your children will be my children. Your home, my home, now and always." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Noah kissed his bride to the applause of their friends and family and the delighted squeals of their daughters. The celebration that followed was warm and joyous, with food contributed by neighbors, music provided by a fiddler from town, and more laughter than the small cabin had ever contained. As evening fell, guests departed with well wishes and promises to visit in the spring, until only Julia's family remained. "We'll leave first thing tomorrow," John Hayes told them, embracing his daughter. "Give you newlyweds some privacy." His eyes twinkled with good humor as he added, "Though with those two little ones, privacy might be in short supply." Julia laughed, returning her father's embrace. "We wouldn't have it any other way." Later that night, after the twins were asleep and Julia's family had retired to the barn, which Noah had converted to guest quarters for their stay, Noah and Julia stood once more on the porch where they had first confessed their love. "Are you happy, Mrs. Daniels?" Noah asked, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Completely," Julia replied, leaning back against his chest. "Though I keep thinking about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't seen your advertisement, or if I had chosen another path. I believe some things are meant to be," Noah said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Out of all the hardship and loss, we found each other. That can't be mere chance." Julia turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Then I'm grateful for whatever hand of fate or providence brought me to your door with bread in my hands and hope in my heart." "As am I," Noah murmured, lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future, together, a future that had seemed impossible in those dark days after Catherine's death, but now stretched before them, bright with possibility. Spring came early the following year, transforming the land around the ranch with vibrant green grass and wildflowers that carpeted the prairie. The twins celebrated their first birthday with a small party attended by neighbors and friends, marking not only their entry into toddlerhood but also the anniversary of the family's most difficult time and their subsequent rebirth. Emma and Lily were walking now, unsteady but determined, filling the expanded cabin with laughter and occasional tears as they explored their growing world. Noah had added 2 rooms during the winter months, with help from Julia's brothers who had returned for an extended visit. The small family now had space to grow, which proved fortunate when, in late April, Julia shared news that brought Noah to his knees beside her chair. "A baby?" he whispered, his hand trembling as he placed it on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" Julia nodded, covering his hand with hers. "Dr. Martin confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We should expect our new arrival around November." Noah drew her into his arms, overwhelmed by the miracle of this new life they had created together. "The twins will be almost 2, he said, his mind already racing ahead. "Old enough to understand, at least a little, that they'll have a brother or sister." "Our family is growing," Julia said, joy evident in her voice, "just as this land has grown more fruitful under your care." It was true. The ranch had prospered over the past year, with Noah able to devote proper attention to his cattle and crops now that he wasn't solely responsible for infant care. Julia's garden had expanded significantly, providing much of their food and even surplus to trade in town. They had plans to add chickens and perhaps pigs in the coming year, making the ranch more self-sufficient. More than that, their home had become a place of warmth and welcome in the community. Neighbors who had initially kept their distance, unsure of the widower with twins, now visited regularly. Julia's natural hospitality and Noah's quiet strength drew people to them, creating a social circle that enriched their lives and would provide friendship for their children as they grew. On warm evenings, Noah often sat on the porch, watching Julia guide the twins through the garden, naming plants and flowers, singing songs that made the girls clap their hands in delight. In those moments, he felt a contentment so profound it bordered on awe. He had nearly lost everything, had been drowning in grief and responsibility, certain he would fail his daughters and himself. Then Julia had appeared with bread in her hands and healing in her heart, transforming their lives in ways he could never have imagined. Now, as the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Noah offered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected love, and for the family that had grown from the ashes of his deepest loss. Inside the cabin, Julia called his name, her voice warm with affection. Noah rose from his chair, ready to rejoin his family, the family they had built together, against all odds, in this wild and beautiful place they called home.